and Alderman
I
Harriet
gotcha.
Gathright,
I gotcha.
and Alderman Clee. Alderman Dowd, Alderman Wilshire, and that's it. Did we get everybody?
Economics.
Oh. Tom's on the committee.
No.
No, oh,
Director
no.
Cummings.
Oh, Director Cummings. Thank you, Director Cummings. Well, he is on the agenda, yes.
He's on the agenda.
He is on the agenda, so, yes.
Wow, it's a big party we've got today.
It's a good one. I love it when we have the numbers. Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. Okay, we're going to get into public
Chairman?
comment. Yes.
Director Bagley has asked me that you recognize the Public Health Nurse, Kim Bernard.
Could you state your name, please, so that we can have it for the...
Kim
We got it.
Bernard?
Thank you. My apologies, we didn't mean to exclude you. Very good. Eventually, I'll get to know everybody who works for the city, eventually.
Stay here long enough.
Wow.
I said if you stay here long enough. That was
No,
not
I
a
take
dig.
that pretty good. All right, we'll now get into public comment. Seeing none.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, please step forward. You're going to be on the quick.
Come forward. I came forward a few years ago. Ryan Hirsch at 15 Prescott Street. A few years ago to see if we could be added to the on-street parking pilot program. I understand that that's no longer an option, but I'd like to also propose our street is going to have work done on it and be repaved in the spring. That we have on-street parking maybe added at that time as well, and some bays set up. I went to the neighbors to see if there was still any interest, and I ended up with a sheet full of neighbors who had actual interest in joining some type of overnight pilot or regular parking program. And also the neighbors that did have concerns, we were easily able to address those. They just wanted to make sure the plows were still going to be able to get by and trash was going to be able to be picked up. That's the what I would like to enter into the record. And I have a copy of the petitions if anyone would like to collect those. You got them? Okay.
Yes, and thank you for doing this. If I may, I have looked at that. We're going to discuss it when we get into. But clarification while you're here and up at the microphone there, what percentile of the residents did you talk to at Prescott Street?
I mean, I only got one day to really do the questionnaire, so I'd say we maybe missed 6 houses between Putnam Street and Bruce Street that didn't answer their door. So it's not going to be all the residences, but we were actually able to talk to a lot of the people who lived in the neighborhood. And I can't exactly tell you what the percentage would be. I just know that there is support for it, and there are enough cars that are crunched in or parked in lawns that it would make sense for a few of the residences to have on-street parking, and maybe try to accommodate those while we also accommodate the people who may have concerns.
Okay. I do have another question. Are you familiar with the past history of Prescott Street and the parking?
I mean, other than knowing that there's just on-street parking on one side, besides from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., I'm not familiar with any other history beyond that.
This is not the first time it's been before the committee, and it's a different committee,
Okay.
and we are going to pour over this and to look at it, but it did have a previously life
Okay.
before.
Yeah, I
So-
mean,
so that you
I
know.
brought it forth originally under.
Even before that.
Oh,
I
even
think.
before that. Okay.
Yeah, no, the city never forgets, it's like an elephant,
Yeah, I mean the demographics of the street have definitely changed. There
Yes,
seems to
it
be
has.
a lot more
I-
renters now. So it might get a little crowded on that street, but we're hoping to work something out ahead of that.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing the legwork with the petition. It's most helpful. And I hope this committee can call on you when we do have, down the road, if we have further questions about this.
Yep, and I'm working with my neighbors too for all of us to
Good.
stay in touch. And
Thank you, because I think we'd be looking with you and Alderman Lopez perhaps as a suggestion to maybe to come to some conclusion on this. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment? Okay, seeing none.
Communications?
There being no objections, I will suspend the rules and allow for the introduction of communications received after the agenda was prepared. And
We have a survey by Ryan Hirsch. Would you support the resident overnight parking permits on Prescott Street?
Okay. Seeing no objection, there being no objection, I'll accept the communication and place it on file.
We also have something from Wayne Husband, Senior Traffic Engineer, recommendations for ordinance 20-003, 004, 006, and 007.
Thank you. There being no objections, I will accept the communication and place it on file.
We also have one from Jill Stansfield, Parking Manager, recommendations for ordinance 20-004, -006, and 007.
There also being no objections, I will accept the communications and place it on file. Petitions?
We have none.
Unfinished business.
None.
New business resolutions.
We have Resolution 20-012, authorizing the mayor and city treasurer to issue bonds not to exceed the amount of $1,100,000 for the Public Health Community Service Division building renovations. Mr. Chair, I move for final passage by roll call.
Okay, we're going to have the vote for final passage. The motion is to recommend final passage on R-20-012. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman O'Brien.
Yes.
Alderman Lopez.
Yes.
Alderman Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Tenza.
Yes.
And Alderman Schmidt votes yes. That would be 5 yes.
And congratulations, R-20-012 is passed. Thank you. New business ordinances.
We have ordinance 20-003, authorizing stop signs on Beacon, Beard, Highland, and Locust Streets at their intersection with Auburn Street. Mr. Chair, I move to recommend final passage.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Alderman Clee.
Thank you. These are streets within my ward, although Alderman, Law has brought this forward. This is quite an intersection of many streets kind of converging all at once, and I strongly support, strongly recommend anybody who's been there at any point in time. I'm hoping, I did read what Mr. Husband said relative to the pouring into a major kind of an artery type thing, and it is a free-for-all. So to have something like this would really be helpful.
Okay. And anybody else have any other further comment?
So, if I may, this will become a 4-way stop?
I believe, yes, there'll be, excuse me, yes, I believe that there will be a stop sign on all 4. It's really a 3-way stop, the way it is, because one of the streets is a 1-way, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions by members on the board? Okay, and as we get, believe it or not, this is one of our first meetings getting ramped up for this legislative session. We're going to try something, and what I would really like is all aldermen, and particularly members of this committee, when you bring legislation up, such as in the case here, we do have traffic, we have parking, we have sometimes the fire, and sometimes the police need to get on board with these things. Just going to legal and writing the particular ordinance is not completing the whole full project. So on this one here, I did ask from Mr. Wayne Husband, who is, and also to Miss Jill Stanfield, who is in charge of parking, so traffic and parking, and they did give us a synopsis as what they're supposed to do on their personal expertise and recommendations on what to do. And in this case, as mentioned by Alderman Clee, thank you, it had more under the jurisdiction of Mr. Husband, and he has no complaints on the matter. So therefore, the motion, any other further comment? Yes, Alderman Clee.
I just want to add one thing. If you read what Mr. Husbands wrote, he referred to it as being warrant. And that means that there's certain legislative and kind of legality of that it has to truly warrant the need for it. And there's certain criteria. And it's the level of traffic, the level of angle coming into these and so on. And they literally sit someone there to look at, to monitor and so on. So when he says it warrants it, he means it by every letter of the law. So thank you.
Okay. And any additional comment? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. The motion on pending before us is for final passage. All those who are in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. To the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next, we have ordinance 20-004, allowing permitted overnight on-street parking on 8th Street. And, Mr. Chair, I would like to recommend that this to be tabled for further study.
Okay, thank you. The motion before us is a tabling motion for further study, but because I wrote into it tabling for further study, I imagine several of you may have some additional questions. So I will break the tabling motion rule of no discussion. It's usually a standalone, but that basically, Mr. Cummings is here, and so I will allow some leeway. Now, I would like just to give you the chairman's kind of overview of these matters. I would like, and I hope it's the feeling of this committee, to realize when we get into overnight parking, it's sort of like a jewel of the city, not to have cars all over the place. But once it gets out the bag, try to retrieve it is extremely difficult, if at all, to get it back. There's another thing, who can park where and what, and we're now, as part of our growing pains of this particular city, starting to get into something that is now other administrations or other legislative boards hadn't come up with. We are on the dawn of maybe a recommendation out of this committee to even get into permitted parking. So as you know, we do have a study that is coming up. And I would like to, if it's the flavor of this board, I hear the good people of 8th Street, but I question 8th Street is a pretty long street. What's going to happen to 7th, 6th, 5th Street? We got to have the plan, okay? And to be prudent and to be very thoughtful with that. So if you can entertain that with me, I would like to have a discussion by my fellow board members to look at this and putting this in for supporting the motion of tabling for further study to include it into the parking study. Any discussion on the pending motion? Alderman Wilshire.
I'm not on the committee, but when is the parking study slated for?
Mr. Clemens, excuse me, Cummings, excuse me.
Yeah, for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development. We have a tentative kickoff date scheduled for March 17th. It will be on your Finance Committee agenda for next Wednesday. And we're anticipating a 3-ish, 4-ish month process with it wrapping up in mid-summer. So we're pretty excited to get it underway. It's been a long time coming.
Mr. Cummings, I would like to say Alderman O'Brien will be nowhere near that meeting on March 17th.
Oh, the 17th.
Thank you. Further comment? Alderman Lopez.
So obviously, I'm opposed to this. I think we have a responsibility to listen to our constituents when they make requests of us. We received a pretty lengthy petition from 8th Street, It was on the list of priority most requested streets that the city clerk had. Some members of this board weren't even aware that we had a list. There doesn't seem to be any continuity of treatment or attention to this issue. We did address this issue back in 2016 with the pilot program, and at the conclusion of that, and even in the process of that, we discussed a need for additional expansion and progress to be made. We had talked with Director Cummings to that effect. Director Cummings had agreed to continue working on it. We had decided collectively as that board at the time, I don't think I was the only member of the board, but Alderman O'Brien, were you on the board when we did that?
Yes.
So we had agreed to take it up in, the succeeding year, which we didn't do. And I know I was on the board, the Committee on Infrastructure, during that year, and I brought it up several times in a matter of discussion that we do need to discuss on-street overnight parking, and no action was taken. And then the following year, I brought it up again, and we had discussions where we all agreed there's a problem, and there is more people living in the city now than ever before. Maybe the zoning board needs to stop automatically granting subdivisions, but ultimately, we do need to have conversations about parking, and we continued not to have those. Last year, I brought it up, and I, up until this point, have, I believe, been pretty polite in not issuing one ordinance at a time, out of respect for that discussion in 2016, where we said we should do this as a bundle, we should have a plan, we should look at how all the streets will work, and I don't think my constituents were served by that at all. I think some constituents, such as Ryan and the residents of Prescott Street, attempted to submit their streets for discussion, and were just quietly moved to the side. I think in the ensuing years, nothing was done at all. And that same can probably be said for 11th Street as well. So I'm not in favor of abdicating our responsibility as aldermen in favor of what constituents are asking us to do. Because I can understand the need for safety and confirming with the fire department, the police, and DPW that these streets are appropriate. And I did that last year, and I got favorable recommendations for 8th Street at the time. Just because 8th Street qualifies doesn't mean I was gonna put in 7th Street, 6th Street, and 5th Street, because I haven't received petitions for those. And they wouldn't necessarily be wide enough or safe enough to admit those. But there seems to be an intent to not take any action whatsoever on parking, whether it's daytime parking, where businesses are being unfairly impacted by it, and some are closing, or whether it's overnight parking and residents can't park in front of their own house. There seems to be no will to actually take action. And now we have another start date of March, but if I remember this conversation from the fall, the start date was October, November, December, the next budgetary season. I believe we tabled it because we'd be getting right on it. So we make a lot of promises, but we're delivering nothing. So I don't think we should just wait. I think we should continue with studies that are relevant to areas that, we need studies in, downtown parking, but I don't think we should be including every parking area in Nashua. I mean, 11th Street, 8th Street, those are not near the downtown area. The Prescott Street, which I imagine will be the next conversation, that's not really in the downtown area. So are we just not going to do anything as aldermen when constituents write a petition and ask us to take action?
The chair will answer this. Alderman Lopez, I do not take any offense, and I don't take any umbrage to what you say, but I think you got it wrong. I'll tell you why. If there's any alderman in this city that should be concerned, it should be you, because this affects the majority of your ward. I am trying to lead this particular committee to hold the fort, to have a quality of life, and that includes parking. And then most of it seems to be within your ward. I wish we could share, but if you want to think that we are purposely doing this because you have the kick me sign in your back, which you don't. I want to work with you and have this board work with you on this particular matter. But again, we need to do it prudently, delicately, and for the future. The problems that you bring up have been around since the 1700s. There has never been parking issues on Prospect Street the day that it got paved, or they ripped up the cobblestone, but there is now. And what the problem is now is people are taking what was traditionally 2.5-story wood frame homes and making them into 4-unit apartments, where an apartment has 1.5 cars per city. Now, why is 1.5 per car per apartment come down to a parking issue, comes down to the infrastructure committee? We're not the parking police. There seems to be a gappage, whether it be in another particular board or something like that. It's got to take us all working together. And I throw the branch of Life Preserver or drive the Titanic up here to try to get you on board. But the thing is, to say there, it is not a woe is me. I want to work with your ward, Ward 9, because I also represent Ward 4. I am alderman at large. And when I do something such as this, we're aldermen, we're city fathers, we're supposed to take the time, do it methodically and correct. And that's all I'm asking, that we wait until we get the study to make an educated decision on what we're going to do for the future of parking. This is not going away. Be prepared, Alderman Lopez. It's not going to be Prescott Street. It may be Prescott Street today. It could be very easily be another street tomorrow. This problem is within the city, so we need to come up with a plan. And on the particular bill that we're talking about, you should go down and look at the streets in question. I know perhaps maybe you have. But again, if we fix this one little segmented area without looking at the overview of the whole complete area, did we bite off more than we could chew? Can you tell me that? I can't say it because I don't have, it's not in my crystal ball. So I want to digest each one that comes up. It kind of pains me. I would really like to please you, Alderman Lopez. But I'm going to do my due diligence of what I consider what I was elected to do and do it methodically on this particular board. And I offer you, please, come work with us on this. I think we can get this done. But we're talking a very short time of March 17th, the start of this particular study. We're almost there. And I think we should have, I'll refer to Director Cummings, when do we expect the terminus of the result of this particular study?
I would say midsummer.
Midsummer. And as far as, you know, we have enough life in our terms to start adopting a lot of the recommendations that will come out of this and address these issues. But it needs to be taken back. This is a very serious. And in case you're wondering, Alderman Lopez, I lived it. I grew up in Boston. I've seen where errant parking can go. We need to do this very slow and methodical, particularly since we're holding no parking. And we just, to me, this is the prudent decision. And if you're offended, I do apologize. My intentions are not to offend you, but to do my due diligence of what I was elected to do. Thank you.
I have a question
Question?
for Mr. Cummings. Since we have 2 requests on the docket today, is there any opportunity for us to have those pulled forward on your study so that as soon as the study makes it clear that these will be appropriate, that we could address these 2?
Yeah, Director Cummings.
Thank you. I'm going to answer your question with a qualified yes, and the reason why is yes, mechanically, there's no reason why we couldn't look at these streets in isolation, but the bigger issue, and the reason why I would recommend to you to hold off on this legislation is because of the lack of community input and outreach around developing the policy, which is really important because how do you arbitrarily announce that you're going to issue parking on 8th Street and not on any of the adjoining areas? It's not contiguous with the rest of the overnight downtown parking program. And so have that community dialogue will take time, and that's what I'm hoping we can do, and then have and the other issue here is, which we haven't really addressed, is having a set upon agreed upon set of standards for a policy to actually be able to judge whether we should be actually doing this or not. Let's have that policy level discussion, let's have that community input, and then use that as your lens for when, because you will repeatedly moving forward get these one-off type of requests, you'll be able to more fairly, more equitably be able to opine whether you want to move in that direction or not. Absent that due diligence, I'm afraid you'd be doing a disservice.
There's a follow-up?
I'm totally in agreement with you. I think that this study is essential, and I don't think anything should be done until then. I just would like to know that these two issues can be brought up first, that you know that we're waiting for these, and we will hold these until August. By then, we should have been able
Yes.
to take care of all your requirements in the study, and we'll know that we can work on these at that point.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, in the queue, have Alderman Flake.
Thank you for taking my questions. And after my question to Director Cummings, I do have one kind of comment that I want to follow up on that. Director Cummings, this parking survey, it's not for the entire city, it's for a very specific area. I know it goes partly into my ward, Ward 3. Could you kind of just give a direction as to what is covered with it? Because as Alderman Lopez pointed out, he wasn't sure if some of those streets would be encompassed in that. So if you could kind of give us a broad outline of that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alderwoman Clee. During the procurement process, we held an informal scoping session, which we invited interested parties, including members of this Board of Aldermen, to that meeting to have a conversation about where we would scope out this work. Alderwoman Clee, I believe you participated in that meeting, and we essentially outlined a study area, which we quote-unquote call the downtown, which for rough landmarks, we're going to be talking about, Holman Stadium, just a little, just south of Holman Stadium, down to the hospital or Globe Plaza, that north-south, then looking all the way as far east as, essentially the middle of Crown Hill, and then as far west to actually this area here. I mean, I would say the middle of the number streets, going back to the Elm Street Middle School, that corner of the city, that area of the tree streets, and then going up on the other side of the river north to about Baldwin Street. So that is the area, that we are looking at a very magnified level. But we also have scoped into the conversation that this parking consultant, who's has a national reputation of being an expert in parking, to come help the community have a conversation about citywide parking policy questions. So you can then have more of a citywide approach as well. So you can, if there's citywide parking policies you want to adopt, we can absolutely do that. But when we're having more of a paid parking type program and how we manage that, that would be more focused on that area I just described.
May I? Okay, the reason I asked this question is I sponsored also this bill that you're speaking of now, and one of the reasons why I did it was because in the area that I serve, and as you serve, and as all the aldermen at large serve, and technically I think we kind of all serve the city in general, I have a lot of streets, much like what Alderman Lopez has. Sometimes they're narrow streets, but much what you've said, our zoning board and planning board and everybody else, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, has taken these buildings, turned them into multiple apartments. And I can tell you right now, I have people that are sitting there at bated breath on Beacon Street, Norton Street, Summer Street, Terrace Street, all wanting overnight on-street parking. I can tell you the one on Beacon Street called me and said to me, I have a multiple unit, one which has 5 bedrooms. And I was like, okay. And he says, I have enough for parking of 3 or 4. And I was like, how did that ever happen? This 1.5 per apartment. This is now being rented to BAE people, all which have cars. So he's got a 5-bedroom unit, and he wants all these parking spaces. And I've worked with Ms. Stanfield, and logically, it just can't happen. the people on Summer Street want this overnight parking, and I look at what our laws say about the driveways, and you can't park behind a driveway and block someone coming out, or within so many feet of a private driveway and so on. So we have streets that just can't happen, but we do keep approving these multi-units and in-law apartments and all of these things without the adequate amount of street. And it's very frustrating as an alderman, and what Alderman Lopez is going through, because you want to help your constituents, you want to do everything. And I think he's been working quite hard on it, as I believe you have also, Alderman O'Brien. But I'm glad to hear that there's going to be some of those questions that are going to be asked, because these are true and real problems. I'm going to tell you something very quickly about Norton Street relative to a young woman who called me because her car had been towed. We are doing a really good job, and she pays over $250 a month in parking fees. And she kind of ran into not paying it right away, and her car got towed. Ms. Stanfield worked very quickly with her. We got her car back, but she had to pay these fees and so on. And this is not a person of means, but it's part of the way her building is. And sometimes there's just enough parking to get everybody's car in, but then you got to go knock on your neighbor's door to get them to move your car because your kid's sick and you got to get out. This is a whole total picture we have to start looking at. And while I want to come in with Beacon Street, Norton Street, Summer Street, and Terrace Street and say we need this extra overnight parking, I can't do it. I can't do it till the survey is done. And I also can't do it because I know how some of these streets are. But I don't know what we can do, and I'm kind of looking to you for guidance. Can we bring zoning board and planning board and say, we have to have this joint meeting because we've got to stop doing this? I think we need the apartments, but I think we're hurting the city in the long run, so.
Well, the chair would like to acknowledge that Alderman Tenzer is in the queue, and I'm sorry, I didn't see you waving down there, but can the chair, and please indulge the chair, just to the direct question from Alderman Clay. This is the beginning of a very healthy discussion that we are now really getting into. It's part of the growing pains. Now, a lot of people think Nashua is built up. It isn't. We're still growing, and that's healthy.
Yeah.
We like to see the increase in density into the downtown atmosphere. That's going to enhance quality of life downtown. But when we have issues with parking, whose responsibility? We have parking garages and other different things, but we probably may need to look with additional help of us as aldermen, working with teams with our landlords and working with other boards to come up. This is the beginning. It's not the end. This is a longer road. I think once the due diligence of this traffic study will give us a compass heading of what road to start to go down, no pun intended, but will give us a direction of where we need to go and open up more discussions. And I'll tell you, at this point, I see a multifaceted approach to these solutions. So thank you, Alderman Clay. Alderman Tenzer.
So just in defense of zoning and planning boards, those boards cannot make decisions just based on their preferences. They have standards that they need to follow. Those standards are set by the Board of Aldermen. So when the Board of Aldermen, approved the accessory dwelling units over the last couple of sessions, that's what allowed them, they can't say, well, I think we have too many accessory dwelling units, so I'm going to limit this person, because, quite frankly, any board that did that, any aggrieved party would be able to go to Superior Court and have that reversed. There has to be specific reasons why, in a certain location, someone is not granted the relief that they're seeking. So, I think, to say that it's those boards' faults is not necessarily, if we want relief, we should act as the Board of Aldermen, and then they will follow our directions, follow what the ordinances say, and we'll control development in that way. But I mean, I agree with both Alderman O'Brien and Alderman Lopez. I don't think we can act on this tonight because we can't take a piecemeal approach to this, but I do think that the problem is greater than just the downtown parking study. I think at some point, someone needs to suggest that we do a study, we get a committee of aldermen, police, fire, and look at this collectively as a city. And probably have to go street by street and determine what's possible and what's not possible. And if we want to do overnight parking, then that's the only way to do it, because we can't say 8th Street gets it, but, Monica Drive doesn't. It just doesn't work, can't work like that. Thank you.
Alderman Lopez.
I would strongly encourage this board to look at the past minutes of this committee, because we've had exactly that group working and doing things. That's how we ended up with the pilot study. And we've basically lost a lot of the knowledge that came out of that because there was no continuity of approach. There was no follow-through. So the city clerk continued to keep a list of people that were complaining about parking, and nobody paid attention to it. The fire department and the police used GIS to figure out which roads were not going to be objectionable, to the point where one of the replies that I got back from the fire department was, why do you keep on asking us for every single street? We'll just approve it as long as nobody else has any problems. We've done this work before. We just need to actually follow through with it. And that's what my biggest objection is. I'm not worried about a kick me sign. I don't even drive, so I don't care about overnight parking. I cannot stress that enough. I do care about my constituents who are getting towed and ticketed. And when I have an $80 ticket on my alderman desk with a list of people, it's a little hard to hear, well, no one's really reached out to the constituents or really found out what they meant, because it seems pretty evident like they know what they want. And I've been on Prescott Street at least 6 times in the last 3 months. I know the street pretty well, and I know a lot of the people on it want parking. They want the overnight parking. I think that maybe economic development or parking might know that too, because they keep ticketing them, and somebody has created a whole forest of no parking zones on, no parking signs on an empty piece of land right next to Prescott Street, because people are parking there so they won't get ticketed. So I understand your frustration, Alderman O'Brien. I wish we'd started this 2 years ago, and I would prefer to keep it on a healthy dialogue. But from my perspective, it seems like every definitive point we have just morphs into another one. We're going to look at Holman Stadium, but we're also now going to move off into those neighborhoods too. And we're going to do the midpoint of the number streets, but 8th Street is now the middle of the numbers. Every single goal and promise that we've had with regards to this has not been definitively followed on. So as the chair of the infrastructure committee, if you keep cracking the whip and keep moving progress on this, then I'm not going to have anything to be concerned about. I mean, if I'm not going to win the vote here, all right, I tried. I talked to all of the residents. I knocked on their doors. I spent my time doing that. You guys are the ones who voted it down. That's not going to hurt me politically. I'm not too concerned about that. But if no progress is being made as an aggregate for Ward 4, that's going to concern me, because I do represent that ward, and I want to make sure that collectively their voices are being heard. I don't mind not submitting more individual streets, but as I started this by saying, I spent 2 years not doing that. And so no progress was being made.
And I thank the Alderman. The committee chair would just take a moment. Again, I do, too, share your concerns. We all do. That's why we're aldermen. I mean, this is a citywide problem. And I'm glad, and I hope from what I heard, because I look forward to working with you, particularly, this is the majority of the downtown is your ward. And I look forward to working with you to try to come to resolve. But it's not going to be a very speedy issue. So I urge patience at all of us. And Alderman Dow, I have you in the queue, but I did get a flag from Director Cummings who may want to respond.
No, I don't think, thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably behooves me not to respond at the moment. I was going to take the opportunity to correct some of the comments that were just made, because I was part of the conversations in 2016, and I was here, and I remember it very vividly, but I don't know if that will be productive this evening. I think ultimately what we should do is we should try to focus our efforts and energy to be proactive and continue to work on this issue in a constructive manner. And we have tangible goals in front of us. March 17th, we'll be getting together. We will start this process. This project took a while to get off the ground, because we have a serious scope that we actually negotiated with Desmond Consultant, and it's gonna be about an $85,000 study that we are undertaking, and we are putting a considerable amount of resources, because we wanna get the correct data for you, and we wanna develop some policies that the city can be proud of. So, it's taking a lot longer than maybe we would like, but at the end of the day, we are gonna have a good deliverable and a great document that we should all be proud of.
Can I just clarify one thing with regards to the timeline?
Yes, you may.
I do not believe that you are stalling or not doing anything. I think that we are trying to do too much at once, and it's not helping the individual person. So there's always going to be the people on Prescott Street versus the entire city. And my problem is we're trying to do the entire city, and the people on Prescott Street are still getting towed or ticketed. I understand that the complexities involved and that there have been delays, but frankly, being a pessimist, I never believed we were going to do it very quickly in the first place.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez, and thank you, Director Cummings, for your choice of decorum. Thank you. Alderman Dow.
Just a couple things, 3 random things maybe. You talked for a minute about bringing in the zoning board and the planning board. Before you do that, because they're an administrative board that's following the rules, if you want to find out what can and can't be done, I would suggest having a meeting with Director Marchand and zoning administrator Carter Falk before you bring in the boards, so you know what their criteria and constraints are. The other thing is that the study policy, the study that's going to come out will allow policies to be developed and adhered to. Alderman Shoneman started this whole thing with the parking back several years ago, and it was a test case during the first year and sort of grew, but there was no policy. It was, this street, that street, no guidelines. But anyway, and the other thing is, I've lived in Nashua for 74 years. In the area that we're talking about, I'll bet there's either 0 or very few new streets in that area, but I can tell you the population is doubled or tripled since when I was younger. And you're right, it's caused because I was chair of the ZBA for a while, and there are certain constraints that they're under to allow people to use their property by law. So you need to have Carter and Director Marchand come in and explain to you what their constraints are. They sometimes allow a 3-unit, and the next thing they know, code enforcement's down there, usually after a fire, because it's a 5-unit now. They just made it that way and didn't get it approved. So there's a lot of code enforcement involved, there's a lot of things involved. If somebody's goes before the planning board and the zoning board and gets permission to have 5 apartments in their building, I'm pretty sure the rules say that you have to make sure they have parking adequate for those 5 people, 5 apartments. So that's why I think you need to bring them in to get the true story.
Alderman Jettie.
So, I have several things to say. I mean, I'm a little disappointed to hear that the scope of the parking study is limited. I guess I missed the invitation to talk about what the scope should be, but I suppose you're limited by the amount of money it would cost. But there are people in my ward, which is not, which is very dissimilar to downtown, who have requested permission to have overnight parking on their street because they've got children haven't left like they're supposed to, and they're still living in the house, and so now you've got, a driveway that's supposed to, is designed to accommodate 2 vehicles, and now you've got 4 vehicles. And so, you end up with because of the ban on overnight parking, you end up with people parking on their lawns. And in the springtime, those lawns turn into mud, so I have people who have requested, that they be allowed to park overnight on their streets. And I and Jill Stansfield have been putting them off because we're telling them, Jill Stansfield and I are both telling them, I can't put in an ordinance right now because we've got this parking study going on, and we're going to wait and see what the parking study says. I've talked about this before, similar to what Alderman O'Brien has brought out, and Alderman Dowd. The city has changed. The single-family homes where you had one car, if any, in a single-family home, parked nicely in the driveway or the garage, and a nice lawn and shrubbery and trees and everything. Well, those buildings, the city has, the density of the city has increased. And we're being told that we need to increase the density, that, these buildings cannot, one family can't afford to stay in these buildings. They have to accommodate more than one family. But our laws that require parking, off-street parking, is having, what I think is an unintended consequence of cars parked right up against the building, covering what used to be a nice lawn. And, you travel around downtown and you see that. And it's not, I don't think it's the best look for the city. I'm not sure what the answer is, but, there's a conflict, I think, between increasing the density and allowing people to park. I think we're going to have to allow them to park on the street, because there's not, I think forcing them onto their lawns is not a good idea, and they have more cars than can be accommodated on the lawns. But then you've got, the outlying areas like Ward 5, where you've got some people who have requested permission to park on the street. And I must say that Jill Stansfield, and anybody who's listening, she will accommodate people if they've got a temporary situation. They can call in and get a temporary permit to allow for parking. I'm always afraid of people having, guests over for, I don't know what occasion, maybe St. Patrick's Day. And maybe they've had too much to drink, and they should stay there. They shouldn't drive home, but their car is on the street, and they end up with a ticket. So, but there are also people who live in Ward 5 who don't want people parking on the street overnight. They like the idea that that if, when I grew up, if there was a car parked on the street overnight, it meant trouble. There was something wrong. And the police knew to investigate that. And I think that's what kind of led to the ban on parking, so police wouldn't have to check out these cars. But I think that the city has to have an overall discussion about, how we want to handle parking. And maybe, areas in the inner city, should be treated differently than areas outside the city. But I think we need to, whether, if it's not part of this study, I think we as a committee or we as a Board of Aldermen, have to wrestle with this issue about how to accommodate parking in a better way. And I went out, I looked at 8th Street, and, I see one side of the street, they've got, there are multifamily apartment buildings, and they have these, extensive parking lots on the west side of the street. And on the east side of the street, there seems to be plenty of room to park cars overnight. But then, but I think it's, I guess the residents will decide what they want, but it seemed like, there were areas that could accommodate that and other areas that couldn't. I also went out to Prescott Street and saw the situation there. So I'm in favor, since the study is about to begin and it will be over fairly soon, I support the motion to table for further study. But, I think we need a larger scope of examining the parking issue.
At this time, the chair would like, I have a couple of people in the queue. But if we look ahead on our agendas, we see that there is another matter regarding streets that's very much the same. So I would kind of hope by the second time we get to the other item, much has been discussed, but I am looking for new material to bring up. But right now, I have Director Cummings, then our President, Alderman Wilshire, and I have Alderman Clay in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify. It sounded as though some of what you were saying, Alderman Jettie, is that you're under the impression that this scope of work won't have the conversation about whether overnight parking should be occurring out in Ward 5. From a policy level, from a community outreach standpoint, that will be part of the conversation. That will be part of the study. Ultimately, what comes about in terms of recommendations that are presented in the report for policies is going to be up to this body to decide whether you adopt. It is ultimately a very political decision as to what you want to do, but we have included that in the scope. So I just want to be clear about that. What I was referencing earlier is where paid parking is, because I don't want to confuse people and have people think that suddenly, because we're studying parking out in Ward 5, that we're suddenly going to be putting up meters, right? That is not our intent, right? And I could see that coming. We're not doing that, but yes, we are from a non-paying for parking perspective, at a very high-level policy perspective, and how you manage parking citywide, we will be looking at very specific items, including how we handle overnight parking as a policy matter.
Alderman Wilshire.
Thank you. I agree with Alderman Jettie and Director Cummings. I think we need to do this in a well-planned, well-thought-out manner. I understand that Prescott Street has some issues and that parking should be accommodated there to some degree, but not everybody wants it. There are a number of people that do want it, but what about the people that don't want it? So we've got to take all that into consideration. We've got to know, where it makes sense to do it, and it probably makes sense to do some there. And maybe it makes sense to not do some on some portions of that street. But I think overall, we need to get the input from everybody. I think Mr. Hirsch did a great job getting the signatures, but what about the people that didn't want it? I'm sure there were people, 5 years ago, we had the same conversation about Prescott Street, and there was a loud voice against it. And I'm not saying that's true, because he brought us 8 names of 8 people who want overnight parking, but I think it needs to be more well thought out, more well planned. And, if it comes to that, I'll support it. But I think we need a comprehensive plan before we go ahead and,
Thank you.
keep moving that
Alderman
way.
Clay, and I hope this may be the last.
I really don't mean to beat this dead horse. I want to clarify, when I said about the zoning board and the planning board, I didn't mean bring the entire board. The recommendation from Alderman Dowd about Director Marchant and Mr. Falk, I think is brilliant. And those are the people that I think do need to come to this. But when the ADUs were passed, and I think this is maybe Alderman Tenza can answer this question, when the ADUs came through, And the parking, I mean, I thought to the best what I could find in our zoning and so on, that it was like 1.5 to 2 parking spaces per unit. When we put that in, this is why I would like to speak to Director Marchant and Mr. Falk about the implementation of, we're allowing this particular one that I said about the 5 gentlemen living in that one, they have 5 bedrooms. They were approved to have 5 bedrooms, per what he said. I have not looked that up, but per what my constituent had told me and so on. So the reason why I wanted to speak with them was because I wanted it to be known, okay, if you have a 3-bedroom unit, we approve 3 bedrooms, do you have adequate parking for 3 bedrooms? And I agree with what Alderman Jettie said. Parking on a lawn is not acceptable. I'm seeing it more and more in my ward too. And we have the beautiful historic district, and we have the, as far as I'm concerned, French Hill is beautiful, and I love it, and so on. But I'm seeing more and more of that because, as has been pointed out, some children will never leave home. But and sometimes they rent it out and so on. So I think this is a larger discussion. I think that the parking study, whether it's the paid parking, whether it's the overnight parking, is going to add to this conversation. But I think it's a conversation we have to have, because I, like many of the other aldermen here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people waiting to find out if they can do it. And one of them is a dead end with 2 people on that street that would have perfect, and I haven't even brought that one forward, which I may do anyways, simply because I can't keep holding them off. They're getting tickets, and Ms. Stanfield has been incredible when people are doing emergency things, as Alderman Jettie pointed out. But sometimes they're children that are going to college and living at home. So thank you. Thank you for listening.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, 2 quick things. One, I had somebody parking a lot of cars on their lawns in Ward 2, and there are restrictions of how many cars and what condition and all that can be parked on the lawn. And if they don't meet them, the police are going to have them towed if they don't get rid of them. The other thing is, who's giving out the tickets? I'm liaison to the police department. I don't think they're giving out tickets.
Parking enforcement.
Parking enforcement.
So I know we had parking enforcement that works downtown, and that's probably only certain hours. We have people all around the city 24/7?
Not 24/7, but during select hours, you have parking enforcement.
Overnight hours.
Yeah, throughout the entire city.
How many people do we have? Any night.
Oh, 1 per night.
So the risk of you getting a ticket, if you're out in Ward 2, Ward 5, is, Ward 1, is,
Can I speak to that?
Well, I was good. Go ahead. I'll let you, and then I'll follow up.
Because that gets to an equitable issue.
Right.
And I just want to be very clear about that. Because I don't want to be ever perceived as managing department that we're going to focus on the lowest moderate income residents who can't actually afford parking because they're not going to go out to the outer skirts. And so I've very clearly instructed parking enforcement to enforce the entire city. And until their policy changes, I have an obligation to do that. And because otherwise it would be unequitable to do that. And so I don't want that to be blamed anywhere else but on me, because I've made that abundantly clear to everyone.
so do they get a ticket on the first offense?
No.
Okay, so they get warnings. It's only people that do it on multiple occasions, right?
Correct.
Which it's been the way with the police department before that. So unless you're a habitual offender, you probably have nothing to worry about. If you're at a house and you were celebrating St. Patrick's Day and you didn't want to drive home, you may get a warning.
Yeah, and if I may, Director Cummings, I would like to follow up. In past history, the police department had a gentleman that was in charge of parking enforcement. And if you called up prior to when they start their shift, which is about 11 o'clock-ish, you made the hot sheet, okay? And you were on that hot sheet, and they put it out to every cruiser. But if you decided at 12:30 that you were a guest at somebody's house, and you got the invitation to stay overnight, even though you may call the police and tell the dispatcher, it may not have been referred to the hot sheet, And we're dating in the old days when you actually had to write stuff down and no computers. I know we did live like that once. I know some people can't fathom that, but that's basically the way it is. Now, with parking enforcement, it's almost a 24-hour, 7 thing. If one of our citizens is in a situation where they make the phone call, it'll go to a tape machine, to which the lady or gentleman who is doing the parking enforcement for that particular shift will review in a timely manner and check the tape. And it may not be in a geographical area that they're on that particular patrol for the night, but if it is, then they are prepared to get that. So it should not be like it was in the old days. As a matter of fact, it is a little bit better. And I know on a case-by-case basis, we have worked with people who are home from vacation, on college, and different things like that. So the parking situation is eons ahead of the way it was. And Director Cummings, would you agree with what I just said and everything? Thank you. All right, we're still on 8th Street.
And we're looking
Okay.
to table.
So is there any other alderman that is chomping at the bit with a comment? Okay, seeing none. Can the clerk read the number and the title, please, and the motion?
Ordinance 20-004, I would recommend tabling, allowing permitting overnight on-street parking on 8th Street.
The proper motion, I will, for the record, will say it's tabled for further study, and which can be brought back. I'll call the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, we have one abstention.
I know,
Thank you.
you're all shocked.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez.
4-1.
Do we have other business?
We do. It's ordinance 20-006, allowing permitted overnight on-street parking for a portion of Prescott Street, and I would recommend table for further study.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
I think I could just play back everything we just talked about. I think the same issue, of course.
And as the chairman, I would recognize that, but I would like to give the committee members their opportunity to speak as such. Does anybody want to be recognized for comment? Alderman Lopez.
Prescott Street is not 8th Street, so I think it's worth at least commenting that there are people there who can't park in front of their own homes, are being ticketed, or have to park in a potentially illegal area. Each area is its own problem for the people who are living in it, and I don't think we should be so blasé about it, is to just say, we'll do it later. I get that we're working on the study, and I get the arguments that we need to come up with a comprehensive new policy for the entire city, but I don't represent the whole city.
Okay, thank you. The chair would, at this time, would like to tell a member in our audience, Mr. Hirsch, we appreciate what you did in getting that petition. I think you heard the comments from Alderman Schmidt that we're going to wait to the study and give it somewhat of a committee prioritization. We're going to be working with Director Cummings and other committee members, including this bill sponsor, Alderman Lopez, and we'll see. Give us some time with this. I think you can agree we're trying to do it right. Please be patient and please bear with us on this.
Would it be of help if I were to try to get more community input from my neighborhood?
The committee would love to hear from you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, any other further comment, Alderman Lopez?
So March 17th is going to be a meeting where we kick off the original part of the study. Is that open to the public?
Director Cummings.
Thank you. Yeah, no, the kickoff meeting is just an organizational meeting to start the project, and then we will be having our first public forum. Tentatively, I would say something like April 8th, that time frame. And then from there, and I want to be clear, we have a couple public forums scheduled, which would be entire public invited to like a town hall to discuss parking. But then from there, we have 10 scoped out stakeholder meetings where we're going to go and meet with individual stakeholders like the library, like the Mill Yard, Great American Downtown, Downtown Improvement Committee, PDC and Infrastructure, Planning Board. And so we will have very specific we have scoped out, and that will occur during the month of April and May. We have 2 surveys scoped out that will actually be citywide surveys that will be released to the public. That survey 1 will be released the same time we do the public forum 1, and then we will do a second survey after public forum number 2, which we would think would occur in somewhere around the May to probably beginning of June-ish timeframe. Then we will have a final presentation, which I hope is to this body, for end of June, July-ish timeframe with a report.
Okay, Alderman Lopez, follow up?
Just a follow-up. Is that, so the meeting that we're having on the 17th, it's probably not appropriate to have minutes done, but can a summary be posted for the Board of Aldermen at least?
It's part of the scope that they have to give us minutes.
Okay, that makes it easier then. And this will be on the economic development page?
There's going to be a whole dedicated web page to this study.
Okay.
Again, that was part of the scope.
Okay, thank you. Further comment by anybody with a question on the board? Seeing none, can the clerk read the number, title, and motion?
Certainly. Ordinance 20-006, allowing permitted overnight on-street parking for a portion of Prescott Street. I would move to recommend tabling this for further study.
Okay. The motion on 020-006 is tabled for further study. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
We have one abstention. Thank you. Okay. When the clerk is ready, other items before the board?
Certainly. We have ordinance 20-007, removing the handicap parking space in front of 7-9 Lemon Street. And I would move to recommend final passage.
Thank you. We do have the prime sponsor, Alderman Clee.
Thank you very much. This is, I know I came in front of the board not too long ago requesting a handicap spot for resident within my ward, and this is the prime example of why we shouldn't necessarily do that, but I'm glad that you all did and did approve that. This is the case where this has been a handicap spot for a very long time and no one has been using it. I don't know if the person has moved or passed on or what the situation is, but the residents had contacted me and asked if we could have that removed so that they could use the parking space. They've been, very diligent of not parking in a handicap spot, but when you have a spot that's not being used, so I would appreciate the removal of this, so thank you.
The chair would like to note, for public relation purposes out there, many of you probably drive in your own particular neighborhoods, the citizens do, and they see these signs, and, if it's a situation where a handicapped child or by some means of markings or devices, and now that child is grown up and raising a family of her own in another neighborhood or his own, the sign is no longer legitimate. And the city will come out and take it down if it has served its purpose. Perhaps as we move farther along in the age of enlightenment here, as we're looking at parking issues, probably put some form of time stamp on these so we're not, but the issue isn't anything to really lose sleep over. We're not littering the sidewalks with these things. But I can see where something stays up past due. So I do encourage, if the people know it, I would say probably Public Works would be the one to notify, and they could bring in petition, and we could take a look at it at that time. Alderman Clegg.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. And in this particular case, they did go to Public Works, and they referred them to me in order to be able to do the ordinance and so on. But you're absolutely right. When we do see these, I think they're far and few between. But we've just been talking about inadequate parking. So when there is a situation like this, even if it's a single parking space that is not being used, yet it is a parking space, a legitimate parking space, I would encourage the residents to contact Public Works, contact your alderman or so on to. And Ms. Stanfield has been great when I've contacted her on this. They drive around and they check. And as Director Cummings had said, we do have people that are driving around at the overnight parking space and during the daytime and so on. They're making note of it when they're doing it. They may seem like they're inordinately in a particular place for too long, but it might be because somebody like me has asked, could you go and just kind of keep an eye on and report back to me? And then if they do see someone parking, they're going to give them a ticket. So, thank you.
Thank you. Did I have anybody? Alderman Lopez, thank you, was over here.
First, in reference to your first comment, I'd like to assure my neighborhoods that I'm not driving around in them. But I also wanted to point out that sometimes people, if a handicap parking space is intended for one person's use and that person moves on, it's probably a good idea to make sure nobody else is using it who's also handicapped. Not everybody's like sitting in those because they don't need them. Sometimes somebody's like, oh, I will move into this apartment because there's handicap parking.
Okay, Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, just real quick. If this handicap spot was allowed by ordinance, we should take that ordinance and rescind that ordinance, or is it resolution?
It's an ordinance.
It's an ordinance.
Because now you pass a new ordinance, take this out, the other ordinance is still in the books. And believe me, our books are cluttered enough as it is, and it would, help from an administrative standpoint. Look up the ordinance that created it. And by the way, if it wasn't created by an ordinance, we don't need an ordinance to take it down. So that's the kind of research I think he was talking about earlier.
And when we get this, thank you, Alderman Dowd, when we get this transcribed in the minutes, the chair will look in that and ask that specific question, refer to our administrative assistant, perhaps maybe discuss it briefly with legal and go by their recommendation. Thank you for that suggestion. Alderman Clee.
Thank you very much. I did work with Public Works to find out if it was something that they could just take down, and they came back to me and told me that it was an ordinance. I did not follow up to find out what the ordinance number was, when it had been approved, and so on, but I did know it to be an ordinance, and you are absolutely right. We should be finding out which ordinance it is, rescinding that, and have this rescind that one, and so on. So I have no problems with following up, finding out what it was, and put in a rescinding request. I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Further comments on the motion? Okay, can the clerk please read the number and title in the motion?
Ordinance 20-007, removing the handicap parking space in front of 7-9 Lemon Street, and I would move to recommend final passage.
Alderman Jettie.
I just want to point out that the ordinance,
I just found it, yeah.
does point out that the ordinance authorizing this handicap spot is section 320-72, handicap parking, and under paragraph A, it lists Lemon Street, one parallel in front of 7-9 Lemon Street. And the ordinance that we're recommending passage of
Does
specifically eliminates that. So what you're suggesting be done was in fact done.
Perfect.
When life gives you lemons.
Thank you for finding that.
And that's actually what I just found.
All right. The question has been asked. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you. Okay, ordinances or resolutions tabled in committee?
We have none.
General discussion? Seeing none. Public comment? Mr. Hirsch, if you wish, you may come up again.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Remarks by Alderman? Seeing none, the chair will take the liberty that this was one of the better discussions. I think we worked on trying to wrap our minds around what we're trying to do here with the parking. I guess the first part of coming up with any type of solution is first recognize that we have a problem. And I think we took leaps and bounds in that department, already discussing possible solutions. And I thank everybody here for their comment and input and tonight, because I think the debate tonight was both informative and will go a long way in helping us come to a resolution on this. So I thank you all for your attendance. Thank you very much. There's no reason for non-public session. Do I have, the clerk, do I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, will be in adjourn at the time of 8:45.
Thank you.
Will we get to vote?